This conference will now be recorded.
It is now 7:01 on Wednesday, January 13th, and I call this meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee to order. Just so that we can move certain things along, even though this is a special meeting, I would like to address item 3 before we go into item 2. That's that we are to take action on 2101, approval of submission of $162,000 for state reimbursement of COVID expenses. We already have the funds for this. What we are going to be doing is approving the retroactive submission by the town to December 18th. This is a formality. There's been some minor modifications from the governor. Initially, it was to cover expenses from July 1st through December 31st of 2020. It's now been expanded to cover expenses from July 1st, 2020 through December 31st of 2021. But in conversations with Jen Chinesky, our Director of Finance, it will probably be applied to the expenses we have in the current fiscal year, even though we could carry it over from one to another. The individuals who are eligible for this include all public health and safety workers. It also includes police officers, sheriffs, deputy, correction officers. It includes any payroll expenses for public safety, public health, healthcare, human services, and similar employees, which would include people like nurses in our schools. So this is going to be recorded into revenue as opposed to it being allocated to anyone else. So I need somebody to move 2101. Louisa is moving it. Do we have a second?
Second.
Jan, I see as a second.
Yep.
Is there any questions or discussions? Hearing none, are we ready for voting?
Yes.
I'm going to do this in reverse order. Are there any abstentions?
Yes.
Are there any noes? Hearing none, we're going to assume it's unanimous. Okay. The next, and I'll open this up to the committee because we can move this as well. I handed out the schedule for meetings for the year. We need to do that to ensure that we're not having too many licenses because we only have a number that we can use per day. So that's why we have some Wednesday and Thursday meetings. I am aware that on Monday, February 15th is President's Day. Unless anybody knows that they're traveling and won't be home by 7 o'clock or have other plans, providing that the town allows us to still meet on or have a meeting or conduct business on the 15th. Does anybody have any concerns about what I laid out? I will cancel as many as I can. Okay, I'm not hearing it. I am curious whether or not people have a problem if we move the meeting to 7 o'clock as opposed to 7:30. You guys must all be on mute today.
No, it's a holiday, so that doesn't conflict probably with people's work schedules, probably.
Okay.
Nope.
That sounds good. I also just, and I'll hand this out, I just want to, I will be sending out from, that I have from Kate, what areas of the budget she's covering, and the Board of Selectmen are covering on what days. They do have a legend here, which is indicated by letters that talk about what the cost center total cost is or budget size is. So obviously they're trying to get through a lot of them in the first day on Tuesday. On Monday, when we have our RTM meeting on the 25th of January, Kate will be presenting the town administrator's budget to the first selectman. Please understand when I say that Jamie has had significant input on this as well. It starts at 7 o'clock. We're meeting at 8. In the past, we have been able to get through it prior to the 8 o'clock RTM meeting. The RTM meeting will have some speakers, so if we're running a little bit late, it's not going to kill everyone before we get into the business on Monday, the 25th. So we'll take care of that. If we're good with that, we can move on to item 2.
Jack, I have a question.
Sure.
When are we going to be able to get those books for the town?
As I was reading that, I was thinking, I don't know the answer to that. So I will find out. I'm hopeful that Kate will allow us to get the books at least on the Monday that she's going to be presenting. But let me speak to Kate and Jamie and see what we can do in that regard.
Say, Jack, before we get into the Board of Ed discussion of the budget, just to be clear, so I know, your question about moving the meeting from 7 to 7:30 or choosing which time, was that just with respect to the Washington birthday date, or was that with respect to all meetings?
Good question. I would definitely on Washington's birthday, but you know, if it doesn't affect people who are working, I'd like to do it, but if it's affecting 1 or 2 people that are working, we'll keep it at 7:30. This is minority rules in this particular case.
What date was that?
The 15th, but if we move all of our meetings from 7:30 to 7 o'clock, will that affect those that are, yeah, I'm retired, so it doesn't matter.
Not
So-
during COVID.
Okay,
If we go to in person, it might.
okay.
And for me, certainly post-COVID, that is when I am driving people.
Right.
Okay, so how about we keep it at 7 during COVID? And once everybody gets their vaccine and is healthy and we're moving to face-to-face, or the economy is now considered in a post-COVID mode, we will move it back to 7:30. Is
Yeah,
that reasonable?
One clarification, Jack. Going back post-COVID, I don't think it needs to be narrowed to just when we meet face-to-face, but when a critical mass of the folks participating perhaps are going back to work face-to-face. That, at least for me, is the conflict, the commutation and things of that sort. Which will probably coincide with when we start meeting face-to-face, no doubt, but it's just
to me, even if we're doing virtual, but we have several members of this committee that are now returning to an office, I don't care if it's 3 or 4 of you, we'll move it back to 7:30.
understood.
So this is, as you know, the minority will drive this on that case. So once people are returning to their offices and that will be considered the post-COVID trigger. Is that reasonable?
Sounds good.
Makes sense.
Thank you. I
Yeah, because
appreciate
I'm not. I'm not sure that we're going to be meeting face to face until maybe September of this year anyway. Yeah, and maybe after. I'm familiar with
Hang on,
several
Jack.
technology
We have a-
companies.
Hang on, Jack. Jack, hang on. We have an unknown name that just came in. CLP, can you identify yourself, please? CLP, can you identify yourself, please?
Stacy, it's Catherine.
Thank you.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm familiar that several tech companies aren't planning to go back to work to September 1st, the earliest. So, but as I said, if several people are going back sooner, we'll move it back to 7:30 because I prefer that we have everybody participating. Okay. That brings us to the Board of Ed. I want to just go through some general overview on this, but our purpose today is to identify what areas we want to have delivered back to the Board of Ed in the Finance and Budget commentary that is next Tuesday. So in the past, we've been able to have a written document. What we will do is discuss areas, and then a team of writers, which will be Beth, Peter, I've asked Mike Heitz to join us, and myself, will put together a document and try and get it to everybody on Saturday with full edit capabilities. But I want to at least have a sense of meeting that we're all in agreement in the commentaries. Does that sound reasonable?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Again, everybody's on mute. Doesn't look this way on the screen, but all right. So just to start, some of you may be aware that John Zabrowski and Jim Palin presented to the Board of Ed their request for a 2.5% guidance for the fiscal year 2022 budget, Board of Ed budget. Although the overall budget was talked about as being 3%. And so I just really, right from the beginning, I want to just go through some numbers of how we're looking at this budget to start with. Based upon the state of the town, John mentioned that we're going to see an increase in debt service for over $1 million on the overall budget. And part of that is that based upon the project of cleaning up the reserve and the use of certain general funds, the early retirement of certain debt reduced the prior year's debt this year, current year, by $1 million. So not having done that for fiscal year 22, it's going back up. On the positive side, the Board of Finance determines what the collection rate will be. They were very conservative and used a collection rate much lower than what actual has been. And so that reduced last year's budget by $750,000, actually about $760,000. I'm not anticipating a lower collection rate this year in my preliminary conversation, so that's going to be added back to the budget. Every year we expect to get close to a 1% increase in our grand list. Even though there's been building going on, there's also something to consider is that, you know, when the Stop and Shop was taken down in several of the other buildings there, we can't tax for them anymore. So I'm not sure how the grand list is going to come out. That usually adds someplace between 1 million to 1.5 million to the budget if we just kept the mill rate exactly the way it is because of the growth in the grand list. We won't have that number till the end of January. The there may be some use of the capital contingency. It's approximately 800,000 before any adjustments for changes associated with how the town will look at capital going forward, what it's willing to accrue for, what it's not willing to accrue for, and the adjustment to accruals that are already there. So, you know, if a truck is going to be bought this year, that accrual account, let's say for public works, won't be reduced. But with the new standard being $100,000, that something has to be at least $100,000 before you can accrue for it. Many of the trucks that we see in the police department, public works, park and rec do not meet that threshold. And so I'm assuming there will be adjustments adding back into the contingency account. So that's where John is talking about the 3%, is merging all those together, knowing that we're going to have some increases in debt. And so that's why he could say 2.5 for the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, but still look for potentially a 3% overall. And I think that's a good way to start with. I'm just going to read some of these things and then we can go through and people can comment. This is a compilation of a lot of texts, a lot of emails that were being sent during the meeting to Stacy and myself and to a certain extent Beth. So one of the things, and I actually had a conversation with Dr. Adley about this today. We know the budget's at 4%. One of the things I thought that's been missing, and I come from a long line of storytellers, is that I don't hear the story. I don't hear the story of how we got from where we were last year to a 4% budget. And that may be nothing more that here's the starting point. Here's what we've added back into the Board of Ed budget for items that we cut last year, be it an initiative or expenses that we're recapturing expenses to bring it back up to normal. Here's the incremental costs associated with the remediation and the compensatory services due to remote learning. And this goes across the spectrum for students. It's not just special ed, but remote learning is difficult. And not all students have been able to achieve the goals that are set. So within this budget, and we sort of heard about this, there is both remediation to help students get back to where we want them to be, if necessary, as well as their social emotional. So how much of that is in this budget? What are the increased costs for just plain salary? So if I started with 700 FTEs and we know what the contractual amount is for those amounts, what would be the salary for those 700 if we did nothing? Then what are the changes in staff levels and benefits? So you're going to see later when I look at the healthcare increase of $860,000, that represents 22% of the total increase on the budget. Then what are the new initiatives? And there's quite a few resident in this budget. And then we can talk about what the percentages of each of these are as it relates to the budget. And by the way, when we're going back to getting back to quote unquote a normal, you know, there were certain revenues we didn't get last year and from the Board of Ed. Those revenues also have to be added back into It's because it's not just expenses, but the revenues are also there. And I'd really like to start off with that being our primary discussion with the administration and the Board of Ed, because I think that's very helpful to both the Education Committee and to ourselves in understanding the budget, as well as moving this through the process. So I'm opening that up to any and all discussion. Dan, is your hand raised?
Bert's raising his hand.
Stacy, if you raise your hand, Stacy will recognize.
Ah, okay.
Bert's hands raised.
There's some awful noise in the back. I don't know what happened. It's better now. I just want to recognize the problem that we have every year when we know about any guidance, and that is we don't know offhand until we have the budgets from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education how to weigh the two. Last year, and I think the previous years, there was a substantially lower increase in the budget for the Board of Selectmen than for the Board of Education, for many reasons. Okay? Even though the Board of Selectmen budget is smaller, they have more flexibilities in bonding and other things, financial flexibility. So it's hard for me to see how this is going to come out to a 2.5% target rate until we know more about the Board of Selectmen's plans. A 2.5% target rate, to me, is perfectly reasonable. We know inflation runs about 2%. We know what's going on all around us. So 2.5% is fine. But how does it gonna come out between the two budgets? So I'll give you an example. If the Board of Selectmen budget would increase at a rate of 0, then the Board of Education could increase at a rate of 3.7, and you're still within the 2.5% overall increase. On the other hand, since it's unlikely it's going to be 0, but let's assume it's 2 for the Board of Selectmen budget, it could very well be 2.75%, I would hope, for the Board of Education, in which case you have an aggregate increase of 2.5%. So these are the things to just get your hands around what the numbers are like, okay? 3.99% or 4 and 2.75%, the difference is 1.25% or 1,250,000. So that's when I was listening Saturday. I was looking to find somewhere in the aggregate 1,250,000, and then I could sleep better than when I heard 4%. That's my comments.
I do want to add something here, though, because I think it's very important with how F&B has been looking at the budgets. We have to be very careful when we talk about the town budget, because the town budget has the Board of Selectmen expenses, including the library grant. Then it has the capital, and capital includes both Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen, but and while they may request things, it's the Board of Finance who determines what's being bonded, and therefore we can see changes to that. And then we have the debt service, which is solely a Board of Finance number, which we know is going up this year. So while everyone includes that as saying, oh, the town budget is down, Sometimes the town budget has been down because our capital has been down and our debt service was down. And that's not really a fair comparison. On the same token, I'll also mention that on the Board of Selectmen side, while the Board of Ed is a net number, including revenues or reimbursed expenses in the case of excess cost reimbursement, the revenues for the town is reduced for the total amount that's needed prior to the calculation of what the mill rate would be. So we've been going back and doing a comparison of what the revenue is compared to the expenses, so that each of the three boards that control various parts of this budget are capable of, and that we're capable in analyzing what part of the budget each of those boards control. Because the budget's really made up of the Board of Finance decisions on capital and bonding, the Board of Selectmen decision on what their expenses are, and again, give them credit for their net revenue, and lastly, the Board of Ed. So it's not wrong to say, oh, the town side hasn't grown, but if you look at the components of the town side, there's different ways to look at it from there. That's all I want to say on that. But I do believe that John is looking for a 3% increase. So moving both of these to a 2.5 or thereabouts, similar to what you were talking about, Bert, with the increase in debt, plus some of the other things on how to pay for some of these items, may ultimately get us to the 3% or lower. But again, I want to focus on the first thing that I would like to lead with in our conversation with the Board of Ed and the administration is that we need them to tell the story better. And we need some help in composing some of those numbers and giving it to us, which will make the ultimate presentation, not just to us, but also to the Board of Finance, a lot easier.
And Jack, you'd also say it also makes and facilitates the advocacy of their budget when we get to the full RTM.
I agree. Anybody else have comments on
His
that?
hand is
'Cause
raised.
I think,
Lisa's hand is raised.
okay, so call on Lisa. I can't see.
I'm sorry. So Jack, I just have a clarification question. We just approved 2101 for the state reimbursement for COVID-19 expenses that are going to go into annual 2020, correct?
Yes.
Or those?
No,
Okay.
fiscal year 21.
Is that this budget?
That's the current budget we're running, yes.
Okay. So
But
there was no.
It's being allocated to revenue and not specifically to anybody's expenses.
So
I
is
mean,
it fair?
there will be detail on the expenses, but it's not as if it's going to be a contra account to expense.
Okay, I understand the accounting. But wait,
Jack.
let me finish my question though. Hold on. My question is it fair to assume that if we go for at least 6, if not 9 months of 2021 in the same vehicle and same fashion, that there will be a similar $162,000 that will get added back at the end of this year?
I would not necessarily, I'm only, I cannot say that we will have that. I think it's that we shouldn't be counting on that. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what the Congress does in the first 100 days and the second, if it's passed, in the second COVID bill that may be presented by the president-elect. which will have things coming back to states. So I can't answer that. But I don't think we should budget for it.
Okay, but maybe there's a thought that that because the COVID expenses are all being absorbed right now, they could
They're
be.
not.
They're not.
No,
Okay.
the Board of Education will be coming to the Board of Finance and the RTM to request additional funding for COVID expenses that they have incurred in excess of what they've been able to cover with reducing other expenses. And it's not a
Okay, thank
small
you.
amount.
Yeah, I'm sure it's $1 million. Okay, thank you.
Jan?
Bert and Jan.
Okay.
No, let Jan go first. She had her hand up first.
Thank you, Bert. I would just like to second your idea or your comments about the Board of Ed and having a story. I went to the meeting on Saturday. I wasn't there for all of it, but then I went through the budget and I went back, I guess it was yesterday. Was that board meeting yesterday? I feel as though there needs to be more of a clear statement for us plebeian people who are not involved in the education budget day to day. And I say that as somebody who was on the Board of Education for 6 years. One of the things that we felt important then, and I feel is still important, is to give an overarching view of where the leadership wants the school system to go in what Jack is calling a story way. I don't, we call it goals and objectives. You can call it a lot of different things. But if it would help the Board of Ed if the town could come around and say, I see the direction we're headed in a larger way other than by RC. I don't know if I've made myself clear, but
Jan, I'm not sure that the superintendent didn't in his presentation package up front talk about some of the new initiatives, some of the things that they're going through. I think that the story that they need to tell is that because this is such an unusual year, where things were cut out of the budget last year and now they're added back in, that there's some repercussions in the expenses that are still there from COVID, but I don't know that what percentage they're quantified. And then we need all that before we even get to, here are the 5 or 6 new initiatives that they're doing this year.
okay. Thank you, Jack.
Real quick, tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m., there's a finance subcommittee meeting of the Board of Ed where they're going to talk about the appropriation, which is approximately $2.6 million.
Just to be, what I liked about the presentation of the numbers on Saturday was that we really are making a distinction, or the Board of Education, and I would assume the town and all of us, between what is related to COVID-19, it's a one-time event, and what is the trend that is happening and what are we doing? And that's Jan's remark. What line are we pursuing and what's going to happen, and where are we going when COVID is over? So the presentation included a sheet that nobody really can verify because we don't know what's going to happen, but it made it clear that this year's COVID expenses, next budget year's COVID expenses need to be segregated and looked at separately, and the rest is really about what the education system in the town of Darien is about and how it is moving forward. And I think it's important that people understand that, not only here, we do understand that, but the public at large understands the distinction about the events that are one time and what the program is going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the Board of Education and Rich and the former Finance Committee Chair did a wonderful job of segregating the COVID expenses, which is now in RC 28. But sometimes when I mention the fact that these are COVID-related expenses, I'm not talking about the direct expenses associated with COVID, such as cleaning, other things like that, but that COVID has changed the model of education during the course of the year, and to recover is going to have some expenses associated with it. They're not direct COVID expenses. Peter, you have something to say?
I may have the dumb question of the evening. I apologize, but when you were talking about the separate appropriation to the Board of the request for an appropriation for COVID from the Board of Ed to the Board of Finance, is that in addition to RC 28?
No, that is
or
part
is
of
RC 28 that request that's going to go forward?
For the most part, yes.
Okay, I mean, one of the questions I had was, given that that's supposed to be a separate accounting and request, and that we're all going to be passing on, I'm wondering why it was in this budget book as a part of the overall budget, because if you take that 0.65 out, the increase goes from 3.99 to 3.35, and we're all of a sudden a lot closer to the goal that we're looking for. And there are other aspects of the budget that I think, in terms of telling the story, it helps things out, because if you, again, and I'm relying on other people's crunching some of these numbers, but we go from 3.35 down to 2.8, if I'm correct, when you talk about spending that was deferred from last year. And I think I'm wondering if the Board of Finance forgot about that when they came up with 2.5.
So
Yep.
Peter, that RC is not actually part of the 3.99. It's basically kind of just an FYI.
Okay.
It's them just tracking so we can see.
I mean, I was looking
And then
at
I just wanted to say, as part of, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
No, I mean, it's part of the 3 point. I'm looking at the superintendent's message, page 5. It says, it's 3.99, and 0.64 of that, or 0.44 of that of that 3.99 says COVID-19 and budget control. I understand that, but I mean, it seems to be, if I'm mistaken, I apologize in terms of how I looked at that.
I thought when they discussed it on Saturday that they said that this was not part of the budget. It was just their tracking of it, their accounting of it.
Okay, great. That I stand clarified.
And similar to
sorry,
similar
as
to
far
how,
as far as
go ahead.
As far as the committee questions about the vision for the district and where we're going, I have been sitting on the strategic planning committee for the district, and that is now moved to the Board of Ed, and they will be finalizing that in the next few months. So we'll have more on that to come.
I do want to go back. That's not saying that there may not be additional expenses for COVID in the next fiscal year, but the Board of Ed is not budgeting for, is starting at a budget of 0. So there's no budgeted funds for specific COVID expenses. But we have to be able to understand there's a distinction. Certain things attributable to this year because COVID existed, hence the remediation, hence the compensatory services, are attributable to the educational experience because of COVID, but they're not specific COVID-related expenses such as cleaning and other things like that. So it really deals with the education of the children. So, and I know that can be confusing. Okay. What are the other things, and I had some, what are the other areas in this budget that people want to talk about? Because I have no intention of taking this list and having it fully discussed. We can send it under separate cover and say, when you get a chance, give us these answers, some of which have already been answered, if not on Saturday, on last night's meeting. Stacy, do you want to go? I'll give it to you.
No, I was actually going to say that I like what you sent to us, what you wrote, and I think talking about the story and taking us through that. I mean, I know you and I have been talking, and I've done some analysis based on last year's budget cut and the deferrals, and my analysis shows that with if you take into account what was deferred and basically my analysis shows that the actual increase to the Board of Ed budget is 2.3% ish and not the 3.99 because of the deferrals, the pre-buy, the contractual savings that they found to get to the cut that the Board of Finance came with.
And Stacy, did you say, it's Mike, did you say you're including in that the pre-buy, the pre-purchase?
Yes.
Okay,
and
thank
I sent you guys I sent you that final spreadsheet, that PDF that they did, and that's what I used. And so I manually did the numbers, so I'm sure I have a couple, typos that I need to iron out, but that was sort of what I came to.
Okay, I'm going to move around, and I'm going to go to some of the other areas that I think are significant in the budget. I'm just going to mention briefly the library. In RC 21, there was an analysis showing what the cost of the Darien Library is versus other town libraries within our DERG, and without it being inflammatory, it was pretty eye-opening. And so I think we might want to mention that we await further discussion by the administration and the Board of Ed to ensure that, number one, we're actually comparing apples to oranges first, and then someplace along the line we have to ask, why is Darien so much higher compared to our peers?
Yeah.
I'm just trying
In
to get your
special ed.
attention.
What? I'm sorry?
I see Bob Lyons.
Yeah,
Bob
sorry,
Lyons
Jack.
is here.
Thanks, Stacy. Jack, I'd add to that, and I guess along with that, to me, the library is ripe for discussion. This is back to your storyline. Just where are we going with libraries in general? As technology changes and we shift things, it feels like that's an area at the school that people should be looking at, not only because it's higher than our peers in terms of costs, but where's the story of where a library in general is going, right? Our town library has changed dramatically in terms of what it's used for, and how does that relate to what the Board of Ed budget is?
Stacy, do you want to respond on the library reimagined?
I know
I don't need
that
to board
that's
everybody now. Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
no, that's definitely been a topic of conversation, and it was something that Dr. Brenner started, and I know it's on the to-do list, and I think part of that conversation was also about the strategic plan and prioritizing that, but I do know it's still to come. But COVID.
One of the programs,
as well as the portable still being discussed, and that's part of the facilities conversation.
yeah, we're going to go to the facilities, but I wanted to touch another thing first. In RC 18 personnel, there's a new program called Teacher in Residence program. And there is a cost associated with it. And I'm curious if the committee wants to step a little bit out of our lane and make a comment if we support this program in its conceptual basis or not. I personally do. So I'm interested in any commentary on that.
Jack, that's actually Smith Mark. Oh, I need to raise my hand, don't I? Okay, now it's up. There we go. I actually had highlighted that as I didn't understand. I read the description of the document. I couldn't tell if it was more limiting. I think I understand the concept, but I saw there were limitations on how the teacher in residence, the individuals, could be used. And I just don't have an understanding of, is that a positive or negative? I'm perceiving it to be a positive, but I don't understand how. So I'm just not familiar with the program.
If nobody
Limitation,
minds,
how they're used.
Viruses.
no, I want to see if we can get an answer. Tara, are you still on the line? Can you raise your hand? Can you give us some info on that, please?
I can try to raise can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, ask me again. What info are you looking for? I'm multitasking here.
Want me to repeat
Teacher
it,
in
Jack?
residence?
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit more? And one of the concerns is whether or not the limitations on how these individuals who are participating are to be used, whether or not that's constricting them or too limiting.
So they will be used as, so if you, what we're probably most familiar with is a student teaching model, right? Where a student teacher comes in and is with a classroom for, let's say, a month or two. In this model, this teacher will be in a classroom for the entire year. And it is part of really a statewide effort for minority recruitment. I don't know how many people were able to watch last night, but if I have my facts and figures straight off the top of my head, something like in 2017, there were only 17 certified teachers hired in the state of Connecticut, teachers of color. And so this is, and what they were looking at is the barriers tend to be financial and opportunity driven. So CREC, which is one of the educational RESCs, one of these regional education groups from the state, has taken on kind of mentoring, taking care of the financial barriers to interested parties in this, and helping place them in districts who are interested. So almost all, what we heard from our Director of Human Relations was that almost all of Southern Fairfield County is really embracing this program as an effort to help have a more diverse teaching population. Most studies show that if children grow up with varying, with people of all different races, it helps in their understanding of authority figures. And there's a lot of information we're going to discuss on this at our next meeting, I think. But so these teachers, these would be what is most familiar like a student teaching model, but they would be in the classroom all year. They would also be required to work all summer and learn, work with their mentor teacher, perform district tasks. At the end of that, the goal is really to hire that person as a teacher in the district. That does not mean the teacher has tenure. They still would need to go through any tenure process, evaluation process like any other teacher. If for some reason Darien doesn't have an opening for a teacher, the kind of commitment is that we would help that teacher find a spot somewhere within lower Fairfield County. So I think really what the benefit here is that there will be classrooms that now really have 2 teachers. We heard a lot about pairs and instructional pairs and the cost benefit of that. And so I think we win on the diversity side. We win on a classroom experience side for our kids. And we really take advantage of one of our goals, as Stacy mentioned, of kind of broadening the scope of the district in terms of racial disparities. Tell me if you need more, but I think that might be what you were speaking to.
That was a fantastic description. Thank you.
Kara, this is Iris.
Yep.
What grade level would these teachers be?
So right now, the program from CREC is for elementary certification.
Okay, good.
Because CREC is actually helping these teachers get their full certification. So these would be, there's a debate over 1 or 2, but it would be at the elementary.
Would you put them both at the same school if there's 2 of them? Just so they have.
I don't know.
I mean, I would think that would be helpful for 2 people, since they'd be the only 2.
May I ask the CREC recommends, and all the testimony at the state really spoke towards at least, yeah. But I don't know how they would choose to staff that.
So again, oh, go ahead, Martha.
Yeah, I have just a question. I believe I support this strongly, but it's unclear to me. Do these people currently have a bachelor's degree, but they're not certified in teaching? Are they working towards a bachelor? It's sort of implied that the coursework, although they would not get a master's, is sort of similar to what you would take to get a master's. I just wasn't clear on where they were on the spectrum here in terms of degrees.
So they will end their year with a bachelor's, much like a student teacher. They are finishing up their coursework. And this is not a master's degree. In fact, I think that's one of the questions many of us have. Will CREC stay with these people and help them for their master's? Presumably, if a bachelor's degree had financial barriers, a master's might as well, even though we do support some coursework. But you're at a bachelor's certification. I'm sorry, okay. I don't want to misuse the word certification. You are at a bachelor degree, and at the end of it, you would be earning your teacher certification.
Got it.
So again, I understand this is supporting this, voicing our support for this program, even though it comes at a cost of $80,000 when they have a 4% budget increase, is usually somewhat out of our lane. That would be more of an education. But I thought that I wanted to bring this to the committee because I personally think that this is a good program to participate in. And I just wanted to see if the committee agreed that we should make comment or whether or not they agreed with that concept.
Is this, I think it's a great program, but is it in this budget that we're looking at?
Yes, $80,000 for the full participation in this.
And that's 2 people or 1 person in the budget?
It's under RC 18 personnel.
Right.
And Jack, they represents a partially funded mandate here from the state, or I thought I heard in the beginning it was partly funded.
Yes, we're only doing partial funding. Part of it is that we're also joining the group that that is organizing this, and so we're paying money into them as just a membership fee, which I'm sure is being used for them to manage and move this forward.
So Jack, and then I won't hijack anyone's meeting. It's actually, and Clara asked this question, just to put a finer point on it, we are members of CES. That's our RESC. This is a different RESC. It's not actually a membership fee. Even if CES was running this program, we would have to pay the $10,000. That goes to help support them, support the student. And it is I don't have, I'm sorry, off the top of my head, but it is a fraction of the cost that the state and the RESC are paying. But no matter what RESC is running this, it is that $10,000 is obligatory because it goes to the student's aid.
Right.
Is my current understanding.
Right. And quite honestly, based upon what this teacher's salary will be, it is well below what our salaries are.
Well, except at this point.
I mean, understood. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So, so again, does the committee feel comfortable including this in our document?
Yes.
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 I just have a comment.
Yeah. Yes.
That, by default, when we're coming through these expenses and it's sort of a de facto approval of the concept if we're sort of supporting the number that they're putting in their budget too. So in the category of, do you want to stay in your lane a little or get out of your lane a little? I think we're squarely situated in our lane by showing support of this program by kind of okaying the number. So if you don't want to change lanes completely, you've already by de facto said that, we kind of support where they're headed with this.
I agree with that. I agree with Jen's comments. I'm supportive of the
I
program.
appreciate Jen's. Yes.
But I agree with that.
I do as well. And I like that concept on how we can position that in the document. Okay, next.
Lisa has her hand up.
Call on them.
Are we going to talk about the proposed building condition study? Is that something you want to have a conversation about tonight?
In fact, you're in my head on RC 12. Within the budget, there is a $200,000 price for doing some building study, which just some additional information is the last building study, and I mentioned this during the meeting, the last building study was $138,000, and that also included Ox Ridge. And there was some discussion on this last night. I have to admit it was difficult to hear. And I haven't been able to look at what was being presented on that document yet today. But yes, let's talk about the $200,000 study.
So I guess just top line, I don't think it's the right time and place or the right, particular priority for us to be spending our money on right now. And I would look to defer it if we didn't have to do it right now.
I don't have a raised hand thing for some reason, but I agree. I would defer it. It's simply a look at the conditions of the building. I would think the facility manager is on top of each building. He makes, suggestions in terms of heating. You can look at how old the heating system is, what's the expected life. I should think he should be able to, develop a plan himself. I don't know why you would need a consultant except just to provide backup or something. Anyway, at least I would at least defer it.
I concur.
Okay, we can put that in, hearing no objection to that.
I agree.
We will couch things like we're suggesting that you consider deferral at this time. We'll we always couch nicely.
I just wanted to I just wanted to point out that there's not currently a master plan for facilities.
But this isn't a master plan. This is, I listened to that carefully. This is not a master plan in terms of facilities. This is simply a statement of the condition of the buildings and what will be needed to be repaired or whatnot in the next 5 years. It was my understanding anyway. I knew it was not a master plan.
Yeah, the other thing that I might add to this is, and it was discussed by board members, so it's not that this is original thought. But there's a couple of other things that are going on. We have the portable study going on. We have the libraries reimagined going on, and some of these other things that are happening. So the question is this is one of the items that they might be able to defer. One of the just minor comments that I have on maintenance, there was a very interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to the staffing per square foot discussion. But I also think having the number of schools or facilities serviced by each of those towns would add to the discussion. That wasn't included within the budget document. So like we will have essentially 8 schools, but I believe if you go to, I think it's Weston, or maybe it's Easton, one of the two of them, Weston, they only have 3 schools. So, you know, having the number of buildings you're doing is also part of that conversation. So that's just going to be one of our general comments that we're not going to necessarily make, but we're saying we're going to hand over some questions and go from there. I'd like to move to RC15 technology. Several of us were curious whether or not the K-2 tablets could be deferred. And listening to Mr. Adams last night, the answer is no. I mean, almost a point blank no. The current Chromebooks are no longer going to be supported, which means that certain software that they use will not be able to be retrieved by the students. So we're kind of forced to go and buy those. In addition, when asked whether or not the Chromebooks have any aftermarket value, the answer was no. So that one comes off the table, but it adds back whether or not we couldn't defer the K-1 displays for a year and move the 2-year implementation of that starting next year, even though by looking at their schedule, technology will be increased. It is increasing.
So, Jack, it's Lisa. Was the idea of putting it into a capital account discussed last night?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that next.
Right.
Go ahead, Martha.
Well, I was, you know, I listened to the discussion last night, and I was sold that the Chrome tablets were necessary. First of all, right now, they don't all have Chromebooks. They've been sharing, I guess, a cart of 22 between classrooms. Right. And during this time of COVID, I think they've been using, it was my understanding, and I'm a little vague on this, some kind of software called Seesaw that I think is used on these Chromebooks. Maybe Tara can correct me if I'm wrong. And so they want to continue with this software, which would necessitate these Chromebook tablets. But the question I have, and I think you were getting at it, is replacement of unsupported smart boards. Well, if every child has a Chromebook tablet, couldn't the same teacher put the same information up on the tablet so that you don't need these smart boards anymore? And, you know, are they really being used? I guess that's a question.
But I think we're going to need something there for testing and other things like that. And the tablets are more age appropriate than the Chromebooks. But
Right. I support the tablets. Yeah. I thought he made a good case. Yeah. Sorry.
I want to go and talk about the capital. You know, the Board of Ed should manage their shop. And there's certain parts of the curriculum of which technology, and I'm going to say maybe as long as 10 years ago, started creeping in with the whiteboards, and it may have been under Murray that it did the switch. It may have been before Murray Stagelman. But
I can give you background on that. It was during budget time, and the technology was in capital, and there was a big brouhaha, and the Board of Finance wanted to take a cut, but there was kind of a compromise. All right, we will move technology, and it was a big to-do all the time, technology and capital. So we said, make technology an RC so that we can't specifically cut a piece of, capital, a Chromebook or an iPad specifically, because that's in the area of curriculum, supporting curriculum. So that was the genesis of that. It was moved out of capital into an RC because the feeling was it's part of curriculum and it's something that we should have line item authority on. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's what happened.
Well, I agree with that decision, and you expressed this much better than I was going to, so I appreciate that. But yes, certain things should be the decision of the Board of Ed of how they want to teach their students. And neither the Board of Finance nor the RTM should be deciding what technology we're going to allow them to have or not have based upon a curriculum that they're establishing. And hence, if we move that to capital, that would give other people whose main job is not either educating students or supervising the educators of our students to make decisions which we do not have the same knowledge of. So we can mention in our statement, and I like the discussion, Martha, that you said, that it should stay in operations. Any further comment on that? All right.
Jack, just a quick question on those Chromebooks that when they become obsolete, how do they dispose of them? Do they give them away, send them off trash them?
No, I don't think we trash them. In the past, on some of our changes in technology, we have given them to others who possibly can use them. Some of them are environmentally handled where we take out the component parts. But, or if there's something we can sell in this, in the resale market, we have done that in the past. Or the Board of Ed has, not us, but the town has. So specific to these, it doesn't appear that they have resale value, but we can ask what they intend to do with that from, if nothing else, an environmental perspective. There's a lot of
there's a lot of places out there to donate used computer equipment.
Yeah, I believe they've done that in the past.
Okay.
Since we have, let's see who we have that we can pick on now from the Board of Ed. Deb, are you still here?
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi, Deb.
Hi. I'm here. I'm listening.
Yeah, I know. I'm calling you in. I'm putting you on the spot.
About the Chromebook?
So I apologize for that.
That's okay.
When we have the Chromebooks and other things like that, what do we do with them other than throwing them in the trash?
Well, I hope we don't throw them in the trash. That
I'm
wouldn't be
joking.
an
I'm
environment.
joking.
With iPads, they can be repurposed and they can be sold or donated. We've done that in the past. It sounded to me, and it sounds like you were on the call last night, it sounded like Jeff said they're useless. So I think it's a software issue as these Chromebooks begin to age. So I'm actually not sure what we do with them, but I'm pretty sure they can't be sold or repurposed. But we can certainly check on that.
Okay. I also do believe that, and I've seen it at Nielsen's, but also in the high school, they were collecting some of the electronics and taking them apart for the environmental aspects. And so perhaps that may be one of the uses that we will be doing with these Chromebooks.
Well, there'll be quite a few of them, probably in the range of 1,000. So hopefully we'll find some use for them, and I'll definitely I'll do some investigating on that and let you know.
I appreciate that.
And they're pretty old. They've been used for about 5 or 6 years, so they're well beyond their useful life.
Let's see. Let's go to special ed. Anybody want to kick off special ed?
Which RC are you
Before
in?
we get to the SESS administrators.
Which RC are you in, Jack?
I think Jan's trying to talk, Jack.
Yeah, I just want to know, what RC are you going to?
Okay, well, then just tell her to talk.
I am talking. Sorry.
24.
24.
Found it. Thank you.
If you want to talk and you can raise your hand or do something, Stacy will call on you because I don't have everybody on my screen and I can't see. And Stacy's in charge. Stacy, do you want to talk about ESY?
Sorry, I was muting Mike because he was
Stace?
shuffling papers. Well, ESY last year was done. Sorry. Sorry, I thought I heard background. ESY last year was done remotely, so this year it's back in person. I'm not sure what specifically, or that this year they're planning on being in person now that we've kind of figured out how to do that safely. I'm not sure what you're looking for specifically from me on ESY.
It's Jan. I'm new to this, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind describing what ESY exactly is.
ESY is called Extended School Year. It is a remediation part of the IDEA for children with special needs. And basically, when you have a child with an IEP, you meet with your PPT in a PPT with your team, and they discuss eligibility, and it's determined whether your child needs to go to ESY for summer school because they may regress or they need to maintain their level. And so that's then provided in a 6-week, 5 weeks of services, and that's planned with your PPT, and it's individualized.
Yep, I understand what it is. It's just, since my day, it's gotten a new name. So
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the services.
Okay, sorry. So yes, it's called extended school year, and that's what it is. Well, last summer they still ran it, but it was virtual.
I want to go.
Sorry, we didn't have buses and it wasn't in person. But go ahead, Jack.
Go ahead. No, I just wanted to go to the next area in special ed, and that is there were increases in account 12001, 21305, and 25011, which is consulting services, contracted speech, and pupil evaluations. I'd like if the Board of Ed can provide a little bit more detail on how much of this increase is associated with their anticipated remediation for all students due to remote learning. What might be of the increase might be associated with compensatory services, and what of the increase is just simply contrast costs more. So that's one of the things that I'd like some additional information, because that again goes back to this story that we're talking. Item 4 is interesting. I happen to notice that there was an increase in the floor for calculated by the state for ECR. And I was just curious if Rich could answer whether or not the associated COVID expenses were included, the COVID expenses for which the school is now going for reimbursement, cleaning supplies, blah, 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 whether or not that was included in the calculation for the floor, for the per student floor for ECR done by the state. So I think we're up about $99,000. It was in the book. So
Jack,
that's just a basic question.
Jack, I saw Mike's hand raised.
Yep.
Yeah, Jack, you just had.
I see it.
You just mentioned a few minutes ago if anybody had any questions on the special ed proposal for the 5 assistant principals, and just a couple observations.
No, we haven't gone there yet.
Okay, I'll say that.
Okay. Mike, we're there, so start.
All right.
I wanted to do special ed other than the SESS assistant principals. And since I hear nothing else on special ed, let's go to the SESS assistant principals. And you can kick it off, Mike, for us.
Sure. Just a couple of impressions in terms of what I heard on Saturday as well as last night. I think it was made clear that we're not dealing with a proposal for 5 full-time employees. Rather, it's a upgrade, if you will, of the existing facilitator spots to administrative level assistant principals to accomplish some efficiencies and some better, if you will, delivery of services. And then I think it was probably later on Saturday afternoon, after it was explained about the assistant principal upgrades, if you will, there was a weighing in. Someone's speaker mentioned about the need teachers feel for having paras, and reiterating the need that teachers again find paras to be very helpful. I believe yesterday there was some discussion about the budget's position relative to the paras. I think not increasing paras, or maybe declining or decreasing the number of paras. And it just got me to thinking, based on our experience the year before, about the additions of the psychologists in the various schools, where we went from a period of a number of years of having I think, a floating psychologist going around covering maybe one or two more schools. And then we went to having full-time employee psychologists in all the schools that we ended up in the budget, I think it was last year. So it just got me thinking in terms of the idea of hearing, on one hand, a need for paras, which doesn't seem to be reflected in the budget. And then the idea of the upgrades for the facilitators to assistant principals, whether there be any consideration in trying to accomplish meeting both these needs, which seem to be somewhat competing, whether if we take a baby step and go with the proposal for the 5 assistant principals, maybe instead have, 3 with maybe 2 with a floater or 2, and then having something freed up financially to cover the paras which had been expressed as a need, whether there be any consideration for that on the part of the, fashioning the budget this year. Just reactions, thoughts to what I heard both on Saturday as well as yesterday.
I would just, sorry, I'm gonna jump in on that one. You can't have 3 assistant principals at 3 elementary schools and not have them at the other 2 elementary schools because of parity and equity. That just wouldn't, that wouldn't work. And then as far as paras are concerned, in regards to special education, that is an individualized programming in your PPT with your team that's determined whether a child needs a para or not assigned to them. And that's how paras are determined as far as special education is considered. Aids for classroom is a different conversation.
All right, thanks, Stacy, for that clarification.
I didn't think your suggestion was such a bad idea. I hadn't thought of that, but I mean, they're at the administrative level, but why couldn't, it's a thought, why couldn't they be shared at a couple of schools? I mean, I'll tell you that I thought he made that Shirley Klein made a very good case for them last night, in that they would be services to the special ed area, but that they would also be able to deal with non-special ed students and delivery of services. So I was somewhat convinced of their value, but I hear what you're saying about could it be considered a sharing of them. I don't know, that doesn't seem totally crazy to me. But
Mike and Stacy and Martha, you guys are experts more than I am in that field. I think it's important when you do these major changes, 5 people being upgraded, $200,000, essentially the same people are still there. They might be doing a different job. I think it's important that we all understand what this is all about, even though we're not experts. My background is in business. To move people from the operations side to the staff side, to the administration side, is usually a process that adds to the bureaucracy without adding really anything on the operations side. I'm not saying that this is what's going on here. I think the case needs to be made better than it had been last Saturday, which I witnessed, and yesterday, which I also listened to. That's all that I have to say.
I want to state that, first of all, let's understand that all of the current SESS facilitators that are out there are going to have to reapply for these positions, and they need to have some administrative background in order to qualify. So the people that are currently doing it are not guaranteed that under this new organization, that's their new role, and we're just promoting the same people that are there to a higher level. The other thing is, I'm not so sure that what they've been doing which is not so much in operations, but working with the teachers and looking at the individual students. I'm not going to say this right, so Stacy, you can correct me. But looking at the individual students' outcomes, the new SESS principals, assistant principals, will be doing the same thing. It's just similar to what we had on the department chairs, and I know there's some discussion in there, that when they go into work with a teacher, that they're not a peer where the teacher can say, thank you very much, but I don't need to listen to this. Which brings me to just a little bit of a confusion on the organization. And so I'm interested in, number one, we will be requesting the current job description as well as the new one, just so that that might help us understand what the changes in the roles are. But number two, when we had the department chairs, with somebody who lived through most of their professional career in banking as being matrixed to several organizations, my review was done by the people who I was working for, not by a single individual. So I think that while it's nice to say they will have more direct input because they're an administrator, I still question whether or not they're not going to have direct input into teacher evaluations, because I think that solidifies their role when they're working with teachers.
Jack, just so everyone knows, Rich did a slide on the ongoing cost of the SESs as administrators. It's embedded in that Board of Ed questionnaire sheet, as well as there is a job description there as well.
Right. Well, I'm also a little confused about how they've organized this. So the school psychologists that are now in the elementary schools are in the elementary school budgets, but the assistant principal SESS assistant principals are in the special ed budget. And I'm just curious whether or not the school psychologists are reporting into this assistant principal in the school, so that they're aware of what student outcomes and other things like that need to be. So there's that whole organization, what the input into the evaluations, as well as a question that we did ask during the Saturday, whether or not the school psychologists will be reporting to the SESS APs, and if not, how are they supposed to interact? Lastly, the other thing, and I'm not for metrics simply for metrics' sake, but whether or not it's can be subsequently used, measured, and see if this is going successfully. It was estimated, and the amount was 355 hours per year per school per current assistant principal is being allocated to PPTs. And the comment was, well, now that allows the other AP to work on instruction with the teachers. And again, I'm curious how they're measuring this, of, whether or not they think that 200 hours are now incremental and there was other work for 155. I mean, I have no idea of what they're doing, but I think that that would be a worthwhile discussion by the administration and the board to further substantiate this. And the last thing, even though it might affect student outcome, And I'm curious whether or not we should mention this and how the committee feels. But even though this may be a very valuable reorganization for the outcome of the students, whether or not it's something that can be deferred for a year. You know, because ultimately I'm still looking at, you know, how do they get back to, you know, to get it from a 3.9 to a 3% budget just there is an $850,000 fine. And there's not a lot of them in here. So I open that up for discussion of whether or not we want to even suggest that they might be deferred or have conversation with the Board of Ed subsequently.
I just wanted to point out that with the remediation that we're talking about, I think we're going to see a lot more PPTs next year.
Any other comments? I don't disagree with what you said, Stacy. Any other comments?
Beth has her hand raised.
Thank you, Martha. My only comment is I agree there aren't a lot of places to find chunks of savings in this budget, and there's a lot of room to make up. At the same time, we have so many things that we defer and defer and defer, and if we keep kicking cans down the road, eventually what I'm worried about is that then we get to next year's budget and we've deferred so many things that then it looks like an even big, you know, at a certain point, I just don't know how we even things out.
Additional comments?
Yeah, Jack, as far as the, you know, the whole assistant principal thing, I mean, I think, you know, we've had a number of things that have worked out well, that had at different points had substantial opposition. The psychologists, there were people that were opposed to that, and the one-to-one people were opposed to that. And I think we're all pretty darn happy that we voted those things, push those things forward, and they paid off, and they're delivering, you know, a real value for the students. I look at this in sort of the same way. I think there's what value is to do it when we be paying the same amount or maybe more next year if we approve it next year, as opposed to, you know, if this is something that's that the administration is looking to put in. And I think that the very strong case was made last night. I was very impressed by Shirley Klein's presentation, and it's just one of those things where I think that there's significant upside in terms of the services that are delivered, and I think it is well thought out. And again, just deferring it for years, Beth said, I'm not sure how much the good that really does us. Again, it's just going to be 1 year down the road where we're paying the same amount of money and we're not getting the services that the administration is saying are needed. Now, the other thing is going back to the idea of sharing. I think that, you know, an incremental approach it makes a lot, in some ways, is common sense. However, I'm pretty sure, and I'm speculating, we'll hear from a legal point of view, but I think when you, especially in the special ed side of the house, you have to provide services on an equal basis. So I think, you know, having 1 or 2 schools with somebody full-time and sharing would violate that basic concept and make it untenable. That's it.
Why don't you get a sense, Jack?
Other comments?
Of where people stand?
Yeah. So why don't we, as for, even though there's additional information that we want to have to better understand the change of position from an SESS facilitator to an SESS assistant principal. For those who are in favor of this, can we do an aye?
Aye.
Did I express that
Aye.
properly? It's a sense of the meeting.
Aye.
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 I would recommend that people go who didn't see the meeting last night take Shirley's presentation. I actually thought she did a nice job.
I agree. I agree.
I do as well, but I have to raise things to stir the pot a little bit. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a fun F&B meeting. Are there any nays or abstentions? Hearing none. The last thing I wanted to just briefly touch on was capital. I'm still, and Stacy has done a preliminary analysis, but I want to go back to what was originally requested last year, as we've done in our budget presentations. What was removed from last year's budget? What is requested this year? How much of that is an add back from the prior year, so we can get to the real increase as proposed by the Board of Ed, and hopefully we'll have that by the time that we do this discussion on Tuesday. But the other thing is, and I'll cover this briefly, for those that have a useful life of, I believe, 2 or 3 years and an amount of $100,000 or more, the Board of Finance looks like they may be willing to accrue for those. And it's not just vehicles. The example that was used in the committee was, we're doing some conversion to natural gas at some of the firehouses. And so it would be okay to accrue $60,000, let's say, a year for 5 years, so that the $300,000 was available. The Board of Ed has not had that discussion with their capital, and there's some things that are out there that would qualify for that. Things that would not qualify are things that we would typically bond for as a town, such as roofs, or right now what I refer to as Checkpoint Charlie, which is the high school security place for about $800,000, which is in next year's budget, or not next year, but for down the road. But we want to encourage the Board of Ed, the administration, and Rich to have a good conversation with the Board of Finance and Jen Chinesky to understand what else is out there in the future, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, which may be appropriate to start the accruals now. I do need to get some additional information on that because bonding isn't my expertise. But I do believe if we're accruing for it, then it would be the intention of the town not to bond it. So that's also there. So I want to have that, mention that on the capital side. Go ahead, Martha. Martha, go ahead.
What we just tried to get rid of reserve funds. Now, why are we starting to accrue things? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
I was the lone voice taking your position that you just stated.
Okay.
But since I don't have a vote on the Board of Finance, I think I was greatly outnumbered.
All right.
But
You
we're
know,
gonna
I mean-
find that the accruals that are currently, there's gonna be I'll give you an example. If you recall, there was the town hall maintenance and town hall renovation accounts that at this time has approximately $194,000 in it. And one of the changes will be that that will be reduced to 35,000 with some controls and other things put around it. And primarily because the budget for the town, they don't have the same capability of moving things around and having a transfer without first going to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. So, you know, for emergencies, they have that. The remaining $160,000 will be going into the contingency account. So there will be a significant reduction on things that are accrued and things that are cleaned up. I also believe that Jen is now looking to do 2 closing of accounts, one in September and one in March, so that projects that were waiting for final bills in October and November and now are completed can be closed out and those funds put into contingency, which might be able to be returned to our taxpayers, you know, by using it to purchase current things in capital. So, Martha, I agree with you. But since
Okay,
this
well,
is the new, go ahead.
You know, I've been thinking about it also. You know, you keep wanting to separate what was deferred or why we're spending on certain things that we couldn't during COVID. And I understand what you're trying to do in terms of saying, well, maybe the increase isn't as big as it is, but it's a lot of work to do that. And the final number is the number, and that's the impact to the taxpayer. So I'm not certain. You know, I just wonder if we want to ask them to go back on a number of these areas and try to separate it out. I mean, I don't know. Just my thought.
Well, I'm not looking for a complete redone of the budget. I think we want some general things, and I think that Rich already included that in the package that he discussed with the Board of Ed last night that we couldn't read. Unfortunately, not for any other reason that it wasn't clear on Zoom. So we have it now, and I just think it's just moving some of those numbers around, which I think will be helpful for us in how we're relating what's going on, which ultimately does explain that this is a 4% increase. And it may end up staying a 4% increase. But it's a 4% increase because, and I want to get to the because. As I said, 22% of it is simply because our experience rate is on healthcare, an $860,000 increase.
Well, on the other hand, maybe it is a good exercise, because next year, that which is put in this budget to make up for COVID should not be growing. You know, in other words, the budget next year should deduct all the makeup expenses, and it should grow on that basis. Do you know did I explain myself properly? Did you know what I'm saying?
Martha, you're in my head. Martha, I fully agree with you, and you're in my head. Absolutely. So yes, I fully agree with what you just said.
Okay.
But members of the Board of Ed that are listening, please disregard that comment. All right. To wrap up, I do want to say some things that we've, some other observations from the overall budget. One member of our committee did say that if you listen to Dr. Adley present the budget, it appears very clear that he values efficiency as well as the positive outcome of students. He was constantly talking about this is a more efficient way of doing it. This is a more effective way of doing it. And my last comment is going to be, I want to thank Deb Ritchie, because just as we were organizing questions to ask while we were listening on Saturday, Deb's asking the question that we had. So I do appreciate, as I said before, you might be able to take the person out of F&B, but you can't take F&B out of the person. So I do believe she needed a shout out for that. And
Thanks, Jack.
you know, that's just my opinion. So
Yep,
is there
you
any
made
other
us
things
proud,
that we
Deb.
wanted to is there any other things on the budget that you want, anybody wants incorporated into this? We'll try and organize the main points and get something out this weekend. Martha, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're looking for savings, and it's not significant, but at the elementary school, and I'm just looking at the size of the budget, and you know, the 4% is not even including the capital, but I could see where you need clocks, a master clock system for the middle school and the high school when they're changing classes. And probably a master clock system would be nice to have at the elementary schools. But I really don't see the need to spend $25,000 three different elementary schools when, you know, everybody has phones, which are very accurate in terms of time. I just, given the size of the budget, this would be an area I would ask if they would consider whether, you know, that could be deferred to another year. I also had a question about the renovation of 35 Leroy. I wish they would explain that a little further. Under technology, they said there's been a 20% reduction in the need for copying, and in fact, they're reducing one person in that area. And at the elementary schools, I believe I heard that they're going to be putting in they requested copy machines for each of the libraries. So to me, on the one hand, they're wanting to redo an area, which admittedly is not a nice area. It's a basement. But on the other hand, they're wanting to redo it for a copy center when it sounds like things have been reduced already. And I suspect they're likely to be reduced further in the future. So that's a question to explore that a little more.
Have them both down, all three of them. Keep going.
Just clarification. It's a computer printer, not a copier.
Okay. A computer printer, not a copier. Okay. All right, well, anyway, just to explore it. And then my only other question was ELP. I noticed they have the enrollment going from 64 to 90. And I wondered why they thought that big jump was going to take place. And if the 90 built into the, you know, the operating expense. And I just wondered, I see that they are increasing the tuition for the typical peer to 7,000 something. And I just wondered, I'm totally unfamiliar now with what the price is at a preschool in town.
Sorry. I was just going to say at the Saturday meeting, Laura Straighten answered those questions.
Oh, she did? Okay.
But let's provide some of those answers. They've already given out a significant number of people for the typical students, and they're by sometime in February we'll know for those who have been accepted who will be joining, because a deposit is there, with the understanding that those who are in need of financial aid do receive it for typical students. Okay. There was a decrease last year simply because of COVID. They can handle, I believe, up to 95. Okay. When they finish Oxbridge, the number is going to be someplace in the neighborhood of about 150. And also, the $7,000 is well within the range of what other preschools are, plus the fact that I believe we do more days and more hours than some of the other preschools. And I do have a 2-year-old grandson, and I think both of his parents would love to be able to pay just $7,000 a year
No,
for
I know.
his,
And no, and my question was sort of meant the other way. I understand it's a very good program, and 7,000 is probably a bargain. You know, could the price for the people that are, you know, typical peers be increased further, I guess would be my question. And I do note that in 2019, they only had 65 students in the program. So are the 90 going to be is the increase a combination of typical peers and students that need services, or is it all typical peers incidentally? Do you know?
No, it's because of the 50-50. It is a combination of both. And Laura has been very good in trying to ensure that there are more typical peers in there than other students, so that when new students do come, because they age in, that the typical peers are already there.
All right. Well, that, you know what, that must have been, I watched the first half of Saturday, so I'll go watch that part. Fine. Ignore that.
Yeah,
Those comments.
the only thing I'll add is that attendant or enrollment is ongoing. As children turn 3, they can come. So it goes on all year long, and as yes, and as the preschools are here, call and refer students to ELP, they may get identified and added, as well as the birth to 3 programs.
Are there any other questions, comments from this committee? Hearing none, do we have any minutes to vote on, Mike?
Yes, we do, Jack. We have the minutes from our December 28th meeting, which lasted all of 20 minutes. There is one typo I just direct folks to, which is the second heading under other attendees present. I would change that from the way it reads now in your draft to read none. That's it.
So do I have a motion to vote on the minutes of December 28th? Is that the date?
I'll move it.
I'll second.
I have Lisa who's second. I saw Beth as a second.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye. You can vote even if you weren't there.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's great. And so before I conclude, I will tell you that all of my technology issues, silly me changing my password before a meeting, which didn't have any of my devices linked up to what I needed to get onto the meeting, have all been resolved. And I want to thank Bert for doing a wonderful job of presenting our committee report. I will get out the committee report over the weekend also on 2101 and for everybody's review. And again, I think what we're trying to do, at least in F&B, is send our report to the full RTM so they can read it along with us.
Jack, can I make one quick comment?
Any other-
Lisa? Yeah.
Yep.
I just want to tell you that in the 5 years I've been doing this, this is the best run, best, most thoughtful, furthest advanced set of meetings we've had. So either I'm just getting used to it or everybody has worked really, really hard.
We're all still learning and we're getting better at it. You should know that I am fully in favor of continuing the remote virtual budget meeting for the Board of Ed in next year. And we're all going to meet over at Bert's house to watch. So Bert hasn't agreed to that yet, nor has Lisa, but I thought it would be a lot fun since we could probably all get together, and it's a lot more fun watching it remotely.
Jack, it will be a lot of fun. It will be outside at a safe distance, and Bavarian beer will be served.
Sounds like a plan. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Jenny?
I hear from Jenny and I see Beth. So all in favor of adjourning, let's get done so that we are done before 9. Thank you all.